faces. Thank you for the constant support. The restrooms are located in the buildings to my extreme left and then behind you. Today's guest is no stranger to the NYU community, as she herself is an alum of New York University. And we have thoroughly dissected her book, 100 Rolls of Salaga, here in NYU Accra. She is in the person of Ayesha Harruna Attah, a Ghanaian writer living in Senegal. She was educated at Mount Holyoke College, Columbia University, and New York University. She's the author of Hamilton Rain, Saturday's Shadows, The 100 Rolls of Salaga, currently translated into 4 languages, The Deep Blue Between, a book for young adults, and Zainab Takes New York, her first rom-com. To help us extract the juicy information from her is Nana Darko Asechiama. She's a Ghanaian feminist writer and blogger. She co-founded award-winning blog Adventures from the Bedrooms of African Women and has written for The Guardian and Open Democracy. Sechiyama is the Director for Communications at the Association for Women's Rights in Development and a member of the Black Feminism Forum Working Group, which organized a historic first Black Feminist Forum in Bahia, Brazil. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, let's give them a round of applause as I hand over the mic to them.
Hello. Can you guys hear me through the mic now? It's good to see you all. You're looking so gorgeous. How you doing? We're going to have fun tonight. I am so excited to be in conversation with my dear friend Ayesha. She's a writer I have a lot of love and admiration for, and also a dear friend, like I mentioned earlier. So this is going to be a really fun, chilled evening, and I really want to delve into like all of Ayesha's career and also get a bit into her life. So we're going to span everything. And it's going to be a really interactive session. So do think of the questions you'd like to be asking Ayesha. I'd like us to be able to have an informal discussion, so I will be coming to you guys for questions. And a huge welcome to those who are joining us on the live stream. Should I be looking in this direction for the live stream, or they don't? Over there. All right. Okay. So a huge welcome to everybody who's joining us online as well. And please, those of you who are watching online, you can also ask your questions. I know someone will be handing me any questions or comments later. Yes, so excited. Ayesha, welcome. Welcome to Ghana. You flew all the way here from Senegal. Please, I think we need to give another round of applause for this.
Thank you. Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Nana, for hosting me. Thank you, Shike, NYU, and welcome to everyone tonight. I'm really delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to this for the last 6 months, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, this is really special, yeah. NYU. We're so grateful that you create these opportunities for writers. And Ayesha, let's start with, you have an incredible breadth of work. An incredible breadth of work. And where did this desire to write come from? How did you get started?
I think it came out of a desire to understand why we're here, to understand what our purpose is as people, and to try and make sense of it in my own way. So it started small. I started with Ghana because that's the country I grew up in and that's what I've known my whole life. So I decided to write a book about Ghana from just before independence to the late 1990s, and to take apart her internal workings. So I looked at, Kwame Nkrumah's time. I looked at the successive coups that rocked the country. Then I looked at my experience of Ghana in the 90s as well. So it started with that. And then it started opening up into the West African space, because I'd lived in Senegal at that point, and I'd seen certain commonalities with life there as I'd seen here, growing up here. So I wanted to write a fictional West African country and to explore some of the issues that I'd seen span both places, and even a third country, Nigeria, which I had just passed through, but I had also, I had good friends who'd come from there, so I knew what the stories were. So I created this fictional country and sort of threw together names from everywhere and decided to look at what it was like to be a West African. And then with the third book, I went back in time because I'd heard a story about my great-great-grandmother. So again, it was in the West African space because she might have come from Mali or Burkina Faso. And I think my trajectory is expanding now because with the fourth book, then I went to the Americas. Fifth book, New York. Next book of fiction I think is going to span 5,000 years. So That's all I know for now.
Wow.
Yeah, that's all I know. So yeah, it just comes out of a desire to understand, curiosity, big questions I've had for a long, long time. And writing has been one way to play around with those questions, to have some things answered. Some things I'll never know. But it's curiosity that's pushed me, I think, more than anything else.
And did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
Deep down inside, yes, because my parents, I don't know if one of them is here yet.
Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Mr. Harruna Attah. Thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Thank you, Alaji. Thank you. So they were my inspiration. When I was growing up, they were writing. They had a magazine at the time called Imagine. And I always like to say it was Ghana's New Yorker because it had these cartoons in it. At that time, it was just the cartoons that interested me. But so I grew up in that kind of household. And then later on, they worked in the newspaper space. They both edited and worked at different newspapers and then their own, the Accra Daily Mail eventually. So I grew up surrounded by words and stories, and I always knew I felt comfortable in that space. But I think children have a thing of wanting to defy their parents, so I thought, okay, what is the furthest I can get away from writing? And so it seemed like science was the way to go, but also because my mom had been sick for a long time. She was struck with an autoimmune condition when I was about 12 years old. And so again, that curiosity to find out why, how, kicked in, and then I thought, okay, I'll be a doctor. But even as I was going through high school and taking bio classes, I was writing in a diary. In college, as I was majoring in biochemistry, I took a lot of English classes as well. And eventually, I just realized this is what I want to do. I don't like the smell of hospitals. I cannot see myself in them. So it's something that's always been in my blood. And my sister and I told stories, played for a long time, and we invented this fictional world. So when I look back, it's always been one of creating and imagining characters for a long, long, long time.
So you didn't have that experience where Ghanaian parents are like, you need to be an engineer? Or
Well, I'm going to put him on blast. There was one time, and he not directly, but an uncle called me and said, continue the medicine and have writing be your side hustle type of thing. And I just did not listen to him and went on with it. But my parents are so supportive in everything I do, everything.
Amazing, amazing. We love parents who are supportive of their children and their ads. And I even had no idea that you'd studied biochemistry.
Really?
And and we've known each other for years.
4 years. Wow. Yeah. I'm putting it to good use now, though.
How? Oh, yes. Tell us.
I have a little ice cream shop in my little village of Pobengin. And I'm now, figuring out how things work with air and liquid and solid to create this beautiful dessert that I can't get enough of. So finally, I feel like I didn't waste 4 years of college. So.
Love it. Love it. So let's go back to Harmattan Rain.
Okay.
I feel like that was a really, really bold first book, like the confidence to even go back in time through the 60s to the 70s. What was your research process like for that book?
So at the time that I wrote that book, the Daily Graphic was celebrating, I can't remember how many years it was of their being in publication. So it was an amazing resource. I just sat through that book and used it as a Bible. I think it was from 1954 to maybe 2004, something along those lines. And it was such an amazing resource because they put in articles about the major happenings, so things with Nkrumah, things with his ministers, but then you fall occasionally on an ad for shoe polish. And these are the kinds of details that a writer like me just lives for, because it's a tiny detail, but to have a character put that specific shoe polish on their shoes lends such credibility to your work. And so there was that. There was just talking to my parents, talking to my grandmother. She was still alive at the time, and she was such an amazing storyteller. You didn't even have to ask questions. Just sitting by her, and it would be, a ride around Ghana with her father, who was a pharmacist. So I got all those stories from her. And I think I did a bit of Googling. Google was not as big at the time, but I did some internet research too. And my process has changed a lot since then, but I think I leaned into my imagination a little bit, but I was more bent on getting the facts straight at the time. So we can talk a bit about the change process, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll leave that to the end.
Okay.
Because I have lots of questions around process. Like, as someone who's also a writer, I'm always interested in learning from other writers about their process and their rituals. So we're going to save that to the end. But I also remember when Harmattan Rain came out, and it was a very different era.
Yes,
to
2009?
Yes. But a different era for a writer in terms of marketing your books, in terms of promoting your books. So can you tell us a little bit about how you promoted Harmattan Rain? Because I remember always being so impressed.
Well, so Harmattan Rain was published by a small publishing house in Senegal that's run by Ayesha Harruna, the author of The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. And at the time, while it was still active, there were groups of friends who would come together and find the money to publish a book they liked. So as I was writing, one of the funders, Dr. Natalia Khanam, came by and she said, I like your book and I'll put in the money to publish it. So that's how that book got published. And I did everything. I did the layout. Wow. I found the artist. So everything in Harmattan Rain I did myself. I did the header, footer, everything. So it was actually quite interesting at that age, learning to see how a book came together. And so once the book printed, we sent copies here to Ghana, and then we had copies in the US with the distributor of Per Ank Publishers. And so my mother just provided the funding for me to go on a mini book tour. And I went to New York. I reached out to a couple of bookstores. I went to DC, Busboys and Poets at the time. And I was just knocking on doors, and whoever would have me, I'd go there. And I did, I think, 2 or 3 readings. I went to Mount Holyoke College, my university. I went to Columbia. And this was just by knocking doors. I didn't have any big publisher behind me. And then we came to Ghana. We did a big launch. It was a lot of fun. We did it at the African Regent. And because it's Ghana, I know a few more people, so we got press done. But once the book had been in circulation for a bit of time, I teamed up with another writer, Nana Ikwe Hammond, and same thing, we would knock on doors. I remember once we were in the Bronx. We had been invited to this festival, the Kente Festival, so we lugged our suitcases with our books. We did not sell one single book. No. So we had a lot of experiences like that, and we got on the subway, and then we said to people, do you want to read? And people were looking at us like we had lost it. But, whoever would have us, we tried to sell to. And so, yeah, that was how I did it, just by knocking on doors. And then in Accra as well, I got it into all the bookstores, and then I went away to university. And my mother is amazing. Despite her autoimmune condition, when she sets her mind to something, she's amazing. So she said, you have your books in too many bookstores. People aren't paying. So she just, reeled it in and limited the number of bookstores we're selling to, and then those people were reliable and paid every month. And with Harmattan Rain, I've been able to pay so many things. It's a small book that keeps giving. It's really, really amazing. Yeah.
Wow, that's an incredible story. And I think it's really important for writers to even hear stories like this, right? Because now you're this world-acclaimed writer who gets flown in from Senegal to Accra. But it's important for people to know once upon a time you were lugging your books around and going to a festival and didn't even sell one.
Yes. I mean, it doesn't stop me from still doing the same thing now. I think the lessons I learned in that time are still really invaluable for now. So when I can and I have books, I take them with me wherever I can. And I'm shy by nature, so it takes a lot to put myself out there, but I'll do it once in a while. And sometimes I have amazing friends who do that work for me as well. So yeah, I'm glad I went that route, and then I got a big I've had mostly independent publishers since then, and then Zainab is the biggest publisher, headline under the Hachette imprint. Yeah. So.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. We're going to talk about that as
Okay.
well. Yes. Can we have a first reading from the 100 Wells of Salaga?
Okay.
Like, am I wrong if I feel like 100 Wells of Salaga, maybe because I know it got translated into 4 languages, I feel it's probably the book of yours that has...
It's a breakthrough book.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It is.
Amazing.
So the 100 Wells of Salaga is a book that came to me many, many years ago because I pinned the gentleman sitting in front over there and asked him to draw the family tree with me. And so we sat down and he gave me a beautiful drawing of who was who in the family. And on the paternal side, there are lots of twins. And then on the maternal side, we climb up, and then he says the slave. So my interest is piqued. What's her name? Who was she? So what I gleaned from that was that she was very beautiful. She had reddish skin, which keeps coming out in generations. Like my sister has her skin. And she came from, like I mentioned, Burkina Faso or Niger, somewhere there. And so I tried to write her story in maybe 2012 as like a fantasy of a character like myself falling in a well and going back into time. But it just didn't click as a story. I wrote quite a bit of it, and then I abandoned it down the line. And then I decided to just tell her story as is. And as I was writing, as I was doing my research, I came across this quote about princesses in this region of Salaga. And the researcher, or the author of this book, it was called The Struggle for Salaga by Brima. He said Salaga princesses were allowed to choose their spouses. And even if the person they wanted was in a marriage already, they could break up the marriage and pick, whoever this person was. So I thought, wow, this would be an amazing person to have in my book in some way or form. And slowly, as I thought more and more about her, she grew stronger and stronger, and she had to have her own space. So then it became about these two women, my ancestor who was called the slave, and this woman who is allowed to do whatever she wants. So Amina is the ancestor, and then Wuche is the princess who would eventually come to own Amina. So I'm going to read a little bit from Wuche, just to give an idea of who she is, because I thought she was such a fascinating character to work in. So she's, at this point, in a horse race in Salaga, and instead of paying attention, her mind is racing. Lost in her thoughts, Wuche granted in response. Moro intrigued her. Was it the sharp symmetry of his face, the dark blue of his skin, or was it because they shared a past, one she couldn't even remember? She tried to conjure up images, but her memory was as dry as half the wells in Salaga. Then, as often happens, thoughts of the past led to thoughts of the future, a future she would soon have to contemplate, a future that was appearing more unpleasant by the day because everyone was pushing for her to get married. She'd managed to escape the drudgery of housework by convincing her father to let her study with a teacher in Salaga. But even so, things had stagnated. The next level was to begin teaching women about being a good Muslim. But she could only do that when she was married, which she didn't want. What she most desired was to help lead her people, the Gonjas. She hadn't been named Wuche for nothing, Queen. The original Wuche led a battalion of 300 men to safety. That such a woman had existed 200 years before she herself was born should give her hope. And what of Amina of Zazao, from an even earlier era, who refused to get married and killed her lovers to prevent anyone from usurping her throne? Amina of Zazao could do these things after her parents died. Wuche didn't want to lose her family, but was certain they would soon insist on her getting married. What would happen if she let them have their way? But only on the condition that she was allowed to choose. The general rule was royals married royals. What if she told them she'd chosen someone like Moro, a commoner? Maybe when he reached the status of the likes of Babatu, he'd be acceptable. But we can stop there. And Babatu was an infamous slave raider back in the day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just for context.
So start getting your questions ready. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to come to you for questions. I feel like I have so many questions. Gosh, where do I start from? I think one of the things I appreciate about your books, especially this book, is we get an inkling into what life was like in the past, and also the setting in the northern part of Ghana. I don't feel like we have a lot of contemporary stories that do that. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so I'm from the north, and I grew up in Accra, so there is a part of longing that comes in when I write my books as well. It's a place that I want to know deeply and intimately, because that's where I'm from. So I think almost all my books have a character who's from the north, even if she hasn't lived there. And like you said, I found that most of the writing that comes out of Ghana focuses on the south. And so it's not an obligation or duty, but I just feel like it's almost like a natural thing for me to write characters who come from there. So it's like in my blood. I can't quite control it. And then when it comes to writing the past, I just think we've been fed so much misinformation. And when I think of my own education, there's so many gaps that in writing these books, I'm educating myself first. I'm figuring out things about Ghana, about West Africa, about the continents that I didn't know about. Mm-hmm. And then, doing research, doing that work that for most people, there isn't the time to do, or it's boring, like sitting there and combing through, ship records to understand what went on. But my mind likes that. My mind really enjoys that kind of work, and going through the archives and making connections to things that seem pretty unconnected, and saying, but look at this, that's interesting, and then using that to work around a story, or because I have a character in my mind, connecting it to whatever the character has been pointing me. So I often say that the characters come to me first and almost possess me and don't let go. I have to tell their story. So this ancestor was one of those. She just came into my mind and I couldn't stop thinking about her. So then once I situate where the character is from, I start doing this research, and most of it is in the past. Most of it is set at a certain point, and I'm always fascinated about things that I find. It's just so fascinating what we don't know about ourselves. And even just the idea from what I read that there were these teachers, female teachers, who would travel all around, and sometimes there would be like lions and wild animals around, and they'd travel in groups to teach other women poetry. I didn't learn this in school, and this was happening a long time ago. So it's again from curiosity.
And I think that's what I particularly loved about this book, right? The more complex depiction of womanhood. Mm-hmm. Because I think, through colonization, some of us think, African women were passive and they did nothing, And so when you read novels like this, I think it blows it apart, especially because we know that these novels are, to a certain extent, based on history. So I'm wondering if you could speak to some of your favorite, woman characters in this book.
Okay.
And, my interest in sexuality as well. So
Daddy's in the audience.
Oh, Daddy, block your ears. Because if I'm remembering correctly, I remember reading one of the characters and I was like, oh, is she queer? That's so cool.
Yes. So again, I think when I write, I want to explore as many themes as possible. Again, questions that I've had. So Wuche is probably your favorite character from what you're going by.
Yes.
And probably she's aspirational for me. She's like who I want to be, because she's so badass and so free, and she doesn't let anything stop her. So I've had a few things happen in my life recently, and she's a person who's come to mind, and I'm like, I'm doing very Wuche things right now. And it's felt good to have this thing that came into my mind as a guide for myself. So I like Wuche as a character because she has all this agency, but then life is still happening to her. So she's not unrealistic. She still has to do things, that she doesn't want to, and she has to suffer through them for quite a while as well, and eventually she takes life into her own hands and directs it where she wants it to go. So it was really a pleasure working with a character like that. especially because I had Amina who had been enslaved, and I knew even though I wanted her to break through earlier, I would have loved for her to do that, but I knew the realities of what she'd have gone through. So having Wuche as a character was a nice foil. It was a nice resting point for me as a writer, because she could also inject in humor, a different kind of sexuality. She could inject in just different ways of being that I couldn't quite have given to Amina, who was almost an agonist because she had all these things happening to her. Yeah.
Okay, so let me just go to the floor and check if folks have questions. All right, please approach the mic.
Hello, Ayesha.
Hi, Akatoa.
I recently finished reading the Deep Blue Between, and it struck me once again that I think you are my favorite researcher. I don't know how else to explain it, but like you are the author that's like you are able to take so much research from things and places that you have never been, like as far back as centuries ago, and when you write, I feel like you were there, and then I feel like I'm there. And I wanted to know more about the process of how you are able to translate that research into fiction that makes it feel realistic. You mentioned something about the shoe polish ads, for example, you know, and I feel like that it's one of those things that it doesn't immediately strike one as part of like the relevant research to write a historical novel. You know, you want the big things. You're looking for the big things.
Yeah.
You're looking for the monumental. But like you also have all of these details about the small that makes me feel like I'm there. And I wanted to know like what is the process of like uncovering these things and deciding to infuse them into your work.
That's a wonderful question. And I think you've also answered some of it. It's like the small things that bring these worlds alive, because the big things anyone can research and find out, but like how were people combing their hair? Just a little detail like that, I think for me when I read historical fiction makes all the difference. So I think for the Deep Blue Between and the 100 Doors of Salaga, my research was sort of three-pronged. So I had the family story, then I had a lot of accounts of people who had traveled to these regions. So I would read a lot of travel logs. And I was talking to my mother just recently about Mary Kingsley. I had no idea. I was reading her diary because she traveled to Nigeria in these boats. And she's the one after whom Kingsley Hall in Motown is named after. So that was an interesting discussion. So I read diaries, accounts like that. And then for this, so a lot of those accounts tend to be from outsiders, from Europeans who came visiting at the time. And for Salaga, there were a couple of insider accounts which I just latched onto. So there was one imam who wrote a praise poem about Salaga's destruction. So that was amazing. If I can get somebody from the inside, it's really amazing. And then there were also origin stories about how people came to Salaga. So I read everything. I'll read music, I read academic papers. They can be quite dry, but once you get into them, they're really interesting, especially if you are interested in the topic, then it's fine. And then I'm visual. So if I can get illustrations or images, again, those are things that I just grab and I keep in a folder and I'll keep going back to, so I can form a mental image myself. And then at a certain point, it becomes almost like I can picture the scene because I've done this research. I know what people are wearing. I know what's on people's feet. So I can see the scene and all I'm doing is reporting. I'm just putting my journalism skills to use. So I have to really be deep into the research. I have to spend enough time in the era, the place, and if I'm lucky and I can visit and visit a place, that's also helpful. So with the Deep Blue Between, I spent 2 months in Brazil, even before I knew I was going to write the book. But I I just had this curiosity. So I was working on my book, and I didn't have to go anywhere. But I had friends who were dancers or musicians. So anytime they had to go somewhere else, I'd go with them. And each time there'd be something new I learned. So these things I just file away in my brain, and then it just reaches critical mass. And then when I have to write, I don't even have to search that far, because I've done that work of being curious and keeping these things for use sometime. Yeah.
Can I ask a small follow-up question? Sure. So like the diaries and travelogues and stuff like that, where do you find them? How do you know where to look?
So a lot of stuff is online now. A lot of things have been cataloged. But before I had access to some of these things online, with the 100 Words of Salaga, I spent a lot of time at the Baum Library in Legon. They had the Salaga papers. And then in New York at the Schomburg Center for African American, what is it called? For Black Research, I think it's called. So I would go to libraries, but now you can find most things online, and Google Books is also an amazing resource, because you can search by keyword and then things come up. And sometimes even YouTube has, strangely enough, so many resources that you can just watch to get this kind of information.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for answering my question.
All right. Any other questions?
Mr. Graham?
Yes. Approach the mic.
Hi, I'm Kobi.
Hi, Kobe.
Hi, Ayesha. Hi, Nana. So I'm going to ask what I think is maybe a classic question for historical writers. Where you're writing your story and there's a clash between the facts and telling the story, which way do you go? I'm asking this in context. I've seen Jennifer Makumbi, who wrote Chintu, and she had a response to it. I'm not going to say, but
Okay.
I'm curious to hear yours.
I think story always wins. I just, even though I'm a purist and I have a scientific brain, I want things to be just the way they are, I still think everything should be in service of the story. So that would be my answer. And it is a work of fiction. If I wanted to write facts, I would do nonfiction. So in writing these books and giving myself a lot of creative freedom, I will get as much of the scaffolding right as I can. But at the end of the day, I'm telling a story. Yeah, that's my thing.
She said exactly the same thing. Thank you.
Yay. I passed the test.
And Mazam Mengiste also said the same, so that's
Okay.
like interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any
And
other-
we're storytellers. So you know when
Exactly.
your grandmother is telling you an Anansi story, she's going to take it where she wants to take it. So I
True.
think, yeah.
Sure. Any other questions? Yes, please approach the mic.
Hello, my name is Samuel from 100K for Ghana, which is a charity. I was invited here by a good friend Marcel, who's also a writer. I wanted to ask, I guess, from where you are right now, I always wanted to find out, from where you are to movies, have you ever thought about turning it into a movie?
I think that's every creative writer's dream. I think so. I think we won't lie. We all want to see our books turned into movies. And I actually do want to start screenwriting myself, so I can do some of that work. Like the film for Hamatan Rain, I think I have to just do it myself. And the Deep Blue Between was actually optioned for film. Sadly, it fell through because Hollywood is like that, apparently. But I'm hoping that one of these books is going to be optioned for film soon, and I'll do some of that work myself too. Yeah.
Amazing. Looking forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
We are open for film deals, $1 million film deals.
Yes. And if there are any filmmakers in the audience, please, yeah.
As long as you have the $1 million.
Okay.
We're not. Okay, I shouldn't just Hollywood. I was going to say we don't want to do. Anyway, any other questions? Do we have questions from those who are watching on the live stream? Please approach the mic.
Sorry, I'm a little short. So I just wrote my question down so I wouldn't forget.
Okay.
My name's Sasha. I'm one of the NYU students studying here for the year.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming. So my question is, in the 100 Wells of Salaga, we know you tell two different stories in parallel, and they're obviously very different from one another. So I'm wondering if you could share a bit of the experience of telling a story that is about more privilege in comparison to one which is a struggle, and the inner fight that you felt telling both and in parallel of each other.
Great question. So I think the characters sort of dominate how I write. So like I mentioned possession before. So I almost think of myself as a method actor. Like I just get into character and I'm seeing things the way they see things. So if it's Amina's story, I do feel like I'm in chains and I need to get out. So I lived that and I pour it out on paper. And then with Wuche, again, it actually ended up being not so different because in a certain way, she was also imprisoned and caged. So even though their backgrounds are so different, even physically, they looked very different. One was described as boyish, and the other has these other features. Their trajectories end up being very similar. So I found that through this book, I was in very much the same space and the same register as I was writing. In other books, I've played around with even writing male voices. So in my second book, I had a boy who was a teenager, and that was a lot of fun. That was completely different because I could go into his head and then get into the head of a mother. So it depends on the book as well. And but for this one, it was quite similar, even though one is enslaved and the other is free. The eventual writing of it led me to stay on the same wavelength. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to go to the deep blue between,
Okay.
because we've already had a couple of questions around that.
So the deep blue between takes off from the midsection of the 100 Wells of Salaga. So one of the things I did in writing the 100 Wells of Salaga was to give my ancestor a family. Since we didn't know so much about her, I gave her a family, I gave her love, I surrounded her with beautiful things. But because she's abducted into slavery, she loses some of this family. And two of the sisters haunted me again. They possessed me, and I wanted to know what happened to these girls. So I was approached at the Pija Festival. I see Mamle in the back. In 2018 by Sarah Odedina, who is the editor of Pushkin's Children. And she asked me if I'd written for children. And I said, I have the story already, it's in my head. So after meeting her, I think within 3 months, we had a book deal, and then this book wrote itself so quickly. We met in 2018. By 2019, I think most of the first draft was done, and it came out in 2020. So that tells you how fast it wrote itself. So it follows these twin girls who are separated after this raid. One ends up in Brazil, and the other ends up in the Gold Coast. And I'm going to read a short excerpt from... Wait, I need to double check because I had one plan, and then I wanted to read another section that was about Accra, so I just want to find the page number for that. I believe it was page 131. I don't know why my bookmark moved. I suspect a young little man who moved things around. Okay, so this is starting... Let's see what you need to know. So this is about Hassana. She's the twin who ends up in the Gold Coast. And she's a bit like Wuche. She's also very outgoing. She's the twin who's always been the center of attention. But then things have changed. So I'll start from her voice, what she's saying. And in the 100 Wells of Salaga, she escapes from this man's farm. He's called Wafa Sapong. So his name is going to come back up. I know people do not like him at all, so those who've read the 100 Wells of Salaga. When I was at Wafa Sapong's, my voice left me, and I didn't think it had come back yet. And now, Amele took up all the space, didn't let me feel like my story was important, so I didn't try to make my voice heard. It made me think of Husseina, her twin sister, and how she rarely spoke. If anyone asked questions, I would answer for her as if she had no voice. For the first time, I understood what she must have felt like. "Where's your family from?" Amerle asked. I sat up, I flapped up the pillow in my lap. I told her about growing up in Botu, a place which was beginning to feel more and more unreal since I hadn't seen it on a single map. I told her about our village getting burned by slave raiders, about losing my twin sister, about hopping from place to place. And now I'm here. Amerle's eyes were welling up. She shoved me on my shoulder. "You should have told me this a long time ago. How do we find your sister?" I dream about her all the time. Sometimes I even have her dreams, but it's been so long that I'm not even sure she's still alive, I said, voicing a fear I hadn't want to acknowledge. Even those dreams now seem like childish longing. Maybe my mind gave me dreams that tricked me into thinking they were hers. Hajia always says that to make the heart eat is to bring on hunger. The more you want something, the more you think about it. Honestly, Amerle, I think I'm losing faith. "No," Amerle bellowed, taking me aback. "I think she's in Brazil," I said. Amerle got up and put her hands on her hips. "My father and I haven't kept links with Brazil, but I'm sure one of my aunts knows people who go back. Hassana, don't give up. We can think of a plan as we're shopping." To get to the trading post, we wove through roads that bent and curved, split and fused together without end, and eventually reached High Street, facing Asha Fort, a building built by the Dutch and now being used as a prison. The papers constantly mentioned overcrowding in there. I'd passed by High Street a few times with Hajia in the days when I sold food with her, but had never ventured beyond it to Christiansborg. Amerle and I continued on, loitering by small shops peddling pots, basins, and cloth, until we arrived at a part of the streets that suddenly seemed greener, like another country. "Where's this?" I asked. "Victoria Borg." The houses were different from ours in the Zongo, on an even grander scale than Amerle's house, painted white from roof to foundation, with large gardens surrounding them. Some buildings even stood at 3 or 4 stories. Even the way the trees shot up from the ground seemed to say that this is where the rich live. "Do African people live here?" I asked. "Not many. My father's doctor, some lawyers, only very sophisticated blacks from Sierra Leone. The air smells nicer here. Something is missing." We kept walking, and then it hits me. I can't smell the lagoon. I can't smell smoked fish. I'll stop here. So this is the Kwale Lagoon, even back then.
Thank you so much. I really identified with the thing about the smell because I went to St. Mary's Secondary School.
Oh.
Yeah. So literally, that stench hit me when she was like, I couldn't smell it.
It's been around for a long time. Like in
Yes.
the records I looked into, it just talked about the lagoon smells. And I wonder what it was in those days because it didn't have as much trash as now. But maybe it's just a sulfurous body of water. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really love like how you like handle description and detail. You can like literally place yourself in the scene. And I was curious, like to write the scene, did you go and walk around like those parts of town?
I did actually. So I write a first draft, usually just pouring it down, and then when I'm rewriting, if I've done the research, then some of these details come in. So I had already written it, and I happened to come to Accra. I think this was 2019, maybe around Peja time. Was it? No, because the book was out then. Or maybe it was around Peja. But whatever it was, I ended up going to look for Brazil House because this was, no, Caesar's House it was called. This was a big part of the plot point in the book. And so I was walking around and I could smell smoked fish. And I just thought, this is a smell that wouldn't have changed over 100 years. We've always smoked fish. So it was just a small detail, but it had to come in there. So if I'm lucky and I can go to a place, these are details that color the book, and I love them because they just make a world come alive. Yeah.
And I loved the fact that, you know, you have a book where part of the setting is in Brazil. Because, like, Brazil is a place where we have the largest African diaspora. You know, and so for me, with Year of Return, I'm like, why are we not going to Brazil?
Yeah.
It's the one place I've been outside of the continent where I felt most at home, where people have spoken to me in Portuguese because they assume, you know?
Yeah.
So I know you sort of hinted a little bit about that earlier, but can you speak a bit more to how you experienced in Brazil?
So Brazil was, it was interesting because I was in Bahia, which is where most of the black population lives. And it was going through a difficult point because I think black people were trying to assert themselves and had been looked down upon for so long in that country. And like when you think about some of even the telenovelas that come out of Brazil, you think everybody is white. So I got that at a point where, people were trying to really push for black people to have more representation on screen, in books. And it was very interesting to be there for that and to see that they didn't have to do that much work because they were living as black people were. Like you'd go out into the streets and you see somebody frying akaraji, which is kose, in palm oil. You would see women, and I had this experience at a bus station once. There was a woman cleaning the station, and she just stopped and looked at me, and she wanted to take a picture with me. And I felt just such sadness, because she could have been an auntie. She looked like somebody who grew up on my street. And she was just so happy to be in my presence, and it was just so sad, because you could tell she was looking for some connection. So there is all of that. There are these emotions for me as an African, and I guess just politically, like what black people have to go through there, that's where there's the most crime as well. So it's just, it was a bit tough. And then it was beautiful as well, because I saw so many connections with home. And for me, for a long time, I'd been questioning religion. I grew up in a household that was very tolerant. My father is Muslim, my mother is Christian. And for a long time, I went through a phase where I wanted to be Christian because I grew up in Accra. This is what it is. You walk out of your house and the message is just drummed on you, whether you want to or not. So it's insidious. And I wanted to go to church on Sundays. So then when I got to secondary school, I would go to church, but it just didn't feel right. But in Brazil, I went to a candomblé ceremony. So candomblé is sort of an amalgamation of African religions, so things that were brought from like maybe Nigeria and here and Angola, with the indigenous religions of, South America. But I found it to be so pure and so welcoming, so easy. And yes, there are saints that are mixed with Catholicism, because for a long time, black people had to hide under those, hide with those identities, so to pretend to be Catholic, and a lot of it has mixed up now. But in the ceremony, it just felt like home. And I won't say I'm a candomblé practicant at all, no, but it was a place where I found that African religions had almost been preserved, because in Ghana, for instance, now if it's not Christianity, it's Islam, and indigenous religions have just been pushed to the back burner. It's a rare day when I meet somebody who says, I practice this religion. I've met, I think, one person in my whole life. It was in an Uber taxi, and I was surprised that he was very open with it. So I got to see another way of doing things, and I think what struck me the most was how welcoming and open it was. In all regards, it was just, and so it gave me hope for a way of being that was ours before being colonized, before slavery, before we took on these identities as like being very Christian and Muslim. And so just on a personal journey, it was life-changing, yeah.
I really loved about the book, the depiction of spirituality, including like traditional African spirituality, and the portrayal of the orishas and the traditional ceremonies. It was so beautiful. I could literally see it.
I got goose pimples because in Brazil too they do that. There are sculptures of the orishas. So orishas are like the goddesses and gods and goddesses, and I think we just have a PR problem, because if you think about like Greek literature and how those are forced down our throats. The orishas are the same thing. They meddle in human affairs in the same way. They are, they have their intrigues. They protect. So even just little things, the way we believed in the past, I think, had a sense and a rhyme and a reason to it. So like even the kole, there was this thing I came across like with a twin ceremony, and if you give to the river, it protects you. So you take care of the thing you're giving to. You're not going to throw trash into the river like we are doing now. So I just think sometimes religion and even philosophies and ways of life, they are compressed ways of telling us how to live. And you just have to take them apart to see what the message is. So even though it says, okay, don't go to the river at this point in time, there's a reason behind it, and we have to do that work of taking it apart. And I hope I do that in my work too, in small ways.
I think you really do.
Yeah.
I think you do it in an incredible way. And this book is incredible. Like, I can't believe it's a book for young adults. Like, I feel like it's a book for everybody. It's a book for adults. I love it. I think it should definitely be another breakthrough book for you.
Yes.
And I can just imagine.
And it's coming out in the US March 1st, as is Nana's book. So we have a twin celebration, US editions.
Yes.
Yeah.
1st of March.
Yes, 1st March.
Okay. And so, even though I could talk about this book forever, let's have a little bit of reading from
Zainab.
I love Zainab Takes New York. You know this already.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
So Zainab is a book that was born during the pandemic because I thought we were all going to die. And I said, if we're going to die, I want to do something funny and light. I've always wanted to write a romance novel, and I love rom-coms. So that's it. So let's just do it. So I'm going to read, because it's out in April, so hence the phone. Let's see, I just opened it.
It's available via Kindle.
Yes.
Yes, so you can buy it on Kindle, but in terms of the actual hard copy publication, April.
So Zainab is a young woman who's moved to New York. It's a city I absolutely adore. I lived there for a few years, and I can't get it out of my system. So I knew I wanted to write a book, an ode to New York. There are books like Here is New York by E.B. White, all sorts of books. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I can give you a New York list of books if you're interested. And I wanted to join that list because it's just, it's a fascinating place.
And how appropriate that you're reading this at NYU.
New York University. So Zainab has arrived in New York City after being in college in a small, a New England university for 4 years. And it's not a biography or autobiography. It's made up. It's fiction. Brooklyn apartment. I stood before a brownstone. These townhouses with their giant brown slabs had held my imagination since I was a child and gorged on the Cosby Show. Down the block, purple and yellow flowers pushed proudly out of pots under windows. On this building, the one I was about to enter, the plants looked crisped by the sun. I carried up one suitcase and then the other and knocked. When the Huxtables climbed into their house, they were blessed with a perfect life, a big family with the parents living together and lots of siblings, a spacious living room, a kitchen with all the goodies a West African child could dream of, and those bedrooms. How I had dreamt of having a room like Vanessa's with enough space for a big bed and an armchair. My dreaming was cut short when a small man with powder white hair on his head and chin answered. Mr. Thomas? I'm Zainab, from the Craigslist posting. He pushed his nose into the air to look at me. He studied me, and what he saw was a skinny, tallish girl with dark brown skin in jeans and a striped shirt. It's still not an autobiography. After probably deciding that I was harmless, he nodded and opened the door wider for me to bring the suitcases in. Inside, I squeezed my eyes as if that would make the dark room brighter. He led me past a musty entryway to a living room that was hardly brighter. If only he would push open the shutters to let in the blue skies outside. I sat on a blanket-covered sofa and a cat jumped on me, its nails digging into my jeans. Jangles, down, said Mr. Thomas. He peeled the cat off my lap and apologized. It smells in here. Can I please have some water? It was hot at Mr. Thomas's. My theory was being proved. The New York heat was activating the voices. So she's arrived in New York and she's hearing these strange voices. The old man, shoulders draped with a cardigan, shuffled around the corner of the living room and came back with a brown mug shaped like the face. He watched me until I'd finished drinking. Then he spoke. The room's upstairs, $500 a month. But my daughter is back in September, so just the 3 months. People don't always understand. 3 months only. Want to take a look? I nodded. Just how long had his daughter been away? The place could do with a good dusting. No, a purging, then refurbishing. The cat's acrid urine was now in my nostrils, and my nose itched. Even if this was cheap and temporary, I was beginning to doubt that I could spend even an hour in here. We scaled the creaky stairs where a small stream of light worked in through a dusty, translucent plastic sheet. I wondered who had lived here when it was first built. A bourgeois black family, I wanted to believe. They had settled in here in the roaring 20s and had thrown wild intellectual parties that led to jazzy soirees afterwards. The man must have descended from one of the original owners. And I'll stop here. It goes on and on and on. But I chose this also because even though it's a contemporary book, it still, I think, does what I like to do best, which is it still imagines the past. And there's a lot of going back in time, because I don't want to give it away. You have to get this book. April 1st, I think it comes out. And it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. And it's a trilogy. This was just the first part, so the 2 parts to come. Yes.
I love it. Like, you're showing us like your range as well, you know? You can go from historical fiction to rom-com. One of the things that's unique about Zainab that you mentioned is that she hears voices.
Yes.
Going back to the Deep Blue Between, you know, the twins also had dreams.
Yes.
So there's this sort of element of mysticism.
Magic.
Yeah, and magic,
Yes.
really, that comes across in your work.
Yes.
Can you speak a bit
So
to that?
this is what I wanted to mention. I think this is what I was alluding to when I talked about my process changing. In the past, I'd be very, what's the word, Cartesian, and, you know, it has to be like this. I planned my novels, and I needed to know from A to Z what was going to happen. And as I was writing, things would shift through, and it's fine. I'm fine with change. But in Zainab and the Deep Blue Between, something happened where I just leaned into the wonder that it is to create. It's really amazing to create, and I think for anybody who wants to write out there, just the fact that you start is wonderful. And I leaned also into the idea that once you tap into that, the universe does everything it can to make this possible for you. So it actually started in the 100 Bars of Salaga, because I was sitting on the beach once, and I had this triangle, this love triangle. And right before me, there were 3 dogs. One was white, one was black, one was brown. And I just had to watch them and reproduce that in the book. So then with the Deep Blue Between, I started just listening to that a little bit more, and it works even better if I'm in a place that's filled with nature, and then I can just observe, and everything seriously just works in your favor. So with the Deep Blue Between, again, I'm putting my father in the hot seat, because I was writing, and I knew I was writing about dreams, and there's a part of me that was doubting, like, who's going to buy this? No, it's not true. And my father calls me, and he says, I had a dream about you and your best friend, and you made her cry. And in my waking life, this had happened. And he had no idea. And that made me a believer. So I said, okay, just listen to this a bit more. So I still plan, because I'm a planner and I have to know what I'm doing, otherwise I will go crazy. But then as I'm writing, I just really let myself observe what's going on around me. And then in Zainab, I didn't plan. That's the one book where I didn't plan. And the fact that she could hear voices, that came afterwards. So there's just a kind of beauty that's coming from letting myself lean into the wonder of the universe. I'm using these words, wonder, magic, and because that's what it feels like now. And I would love to teach a masterclass on it once when I figure it out. I'm still working it out. But I think it's a lucky thing when you can create, whether it's, you know, a business or writing or drawing or whatever. And if you can really lean into that, it's powerful, because that's how we're here. Disparate things came together in this primordial soup and created us. So we're doing the same things when we create. So I'm taking an idea, I'm taking a voice, I'm taking a character, and then I'm putting them together and creating. So it's the same power and the same energy. And so, yeah, I'm just leaning into that a lot more now.
The magic of creativity.
Yes.
I'm going to be coming to the audience in a minute, so think of your questions and have it ready. How was your writing process different during the pandemic, right? You wrote this book during the pandemic.
Yes.
Did it change your process?
A little bit, because we were all at home. Everybody was at home and on top of each other. So son was at home, no school. So I would write when I could, and I had a friend who was living in a house. We have a guest house. And she was so wonderful and would take my 4-year-old, at the time 3-4-year-old, for swimming classes. So in that hour, I would just sit down and put words on paper. So having community also helps. And so having this friend do that just gave me a little bit of time. And I think I've become so productive since becoming a mother. I don't know if other writers experience this, because when he's with me, I can't do anything else. So any chance I get to be on my own, I'm on my computer and putting down whatever it is. Even if I'm not putting down things, I'm doing research or just thinking about the topic. And it took me six years to write the Deep Blue, the 100 Wells of Salaga, a year to write the back to back. I've had Zainab and the Deep Blue Between. So yeah, and a 5-year-old who's very demanding. So yeah.
And the question of motherhood and writing, it's such a hot topic, right?
Yeah.
And I know different writers have different.
Yeah, Alice Walker says you should have just one child.
I
think.
am listening to Alice Walker.
Yeah. Me too.
And there's Buki Emecheta who had 5 children, and she's
goodness.
the sound of her children was background when she was writing. I'm how the hell do you do that?
No, that's not me. And I love school. I'm school is a lifesaver. I'm glad that exists. But I also joke with sometimes my mother, and I say in the past, the way our societies were organized really made sense, because then it was the village. There's a cliche, it takes a village, but it really was that. Yeah. So people of adult age could do the productive work. And we've lost that in becoming these nuclear families, and we have to work around that. But I'm so lucky in my tiny village of Popengin, we have formed this village, and every weekend there'll be one parent who takes on all the 5 children, and then the next weekend there'll be somebody else. And if you're in a pinch, you can say, please, I have a deadline. Can you take my son for an hour? So I think having community is essential. In so many endeavors, having community is indispensable. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. Okay, I'm coming back to you guys for questions. This will be my last round of questions. Yeah. Please approach the mic and just introduce yourself and then ask a question.
Hello, my name is Alpha. And Frankie, thank you very much for making the dream a reality. Excuse me. A few months ago, we were lucky to have Ayesha on Zoom, and she talked about the 100 Wells of Salaga. And here we are today talking about 4 of your books.
5.
5 of your books. And, spanning a period of close to 18 years.
For book writing?
Yeah, I mean from
12 years.
Hamatan
12
Rain,
years.
Hamatan Rain to over a decade.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, this very conversation, we're touching on all 5 books. How many times do you read your own books, particularly for an event like this, for you to be able to remember every detail from Hamatan of Rain to Zainab in New York? So I'm curious about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I had abandoned Hamatan Rain for a long time, and then during the pandemic, there was a book club run by Nicola Matthew that reached out to me, and yay! So I had forgotten so many things, and that's a dense book too. It's a big book. I think it was African Book Addict, she was complaining. She said, Aisha's books keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Blame motherhood as well. But there were definitely things that I had to remind myself of. But again, because these books live in me for so long, they are a part of me. So they're things that I don't really have to search for. They're my life. They're my creation. And in the same way that we live our lives, these books are in a certain way, universes of their own, and I'm their creator. So they're things that I don't even have to think about and are just in my mind. And there was a second part to the question, or no? That was it. That was the question.
Yeah. And just to do a time check with the organizers, how much more time do I have?
I think because we had interspersed the questions with the interview, we still have some time.
Okay. How much time is some time? Sorry.
We have like 20 minutes.
I'm a Capricorn. Yeah. Okay, please approach the mic and ask a question.
Before she starts, BC is
BC
the author of Women and Frogs, a.k.a. the Teller of Secrets.
Yes.
Which is out now. Get a copy.
Buy it.
And BC is my drinking partner as well.
So I just wanted to ask, you were talking about inhabiting all these characters and all the different emotions, and not just that, but the situations, like, for instance, finding yourself enslaved and in chains and wanting to get out, and how deeply you connect with your characters. So how do you maintain your center of
sanity.
equilibrium, your sanity? Exactly.
This is a great question. I don't know. I don't think it's ever really bothered me. Also because now I'm doing some work with a therapist, and I'm all about therapy. I'm going to put it out there. And she's having me look into these different parts of myself. So like the inner child, the part of myself that's the people pleaser, the parts of myself that is a go-getter and writes books. And so this is how I am anyway. And I think most people are like that. We present ourselves in different ways. So sometimes it's just a question of being in that world for a while and then coming out. It's like when you go out and have a drink with your girlfriend, you'll be a certain way, and then you go home with your partner or your spouse, you're a certain way. So it feels almost natural, and I never felt like, oh, this is like a split personality, I'm gonna get stuck in this space. But also because I think even though I have these characters inhabits me, I do have like a movie director's remove or a journalist's, not objectivity, but like I stand outside of them at the same time and report their stories. So it gives me a bit of space from them. I can tell the difference. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
And related to that, I was wondering, like, do the characters leave you once you finish the particular book?
Most of them, yeah. Yeah, most of them. The twins are gone. Amina's gone. Amina's father is still there, so
wow.
yeah, so soon.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Yes, you may approach the mic.
Sounds so serious.
I know,
you may
right?
approach the mic.
Marcel! That's my girl.
Hi, Marcel. Who is also a writer.
Yes.
And her book is going to be coming out soon. It's coming out, no pressure.
It's very good to see you,
Good to see you too.
So I had a question about, as you're talking about the deep blue between and Zainab Takes New York, I can really hear the joy that comes from that. And so I can sense that the books came from a really like abundant, joyful place, even though within the constraints of writing within a pandemic, right? So I'm really happy for you for that, because I think it's really important to be able to relate your creativity with joy and with that abundance and attaching it to magic as well. And so when you talk about, obviously the Deep Blue was your first book for young adults, and when you're writing for children, it requires like you really tapping into your imagination in a way that it's a bit reckless, I guess. There's a lot more freedom, I think, as opposed to adults where you have to be a bit more serious about things. How did you find that process in going from writing historical fiction for adults to then writing Deep Blue for children, for young people? Yeah. And then also for Zainab, going into this really playful, non-serious but serious space. Like, I'm really interested about your approach for those two books specifically.
So I think I did not make the distinction. I just wrote the Deep Blue between as I felt it. Luckily, the characters were young. They started off at age 9, and then by the end, the books end about 18. So they just lend themselves to that playful childhood space. But even so, I think the tone changes as they grow up. But also, as I was writing, I just thought of myself as a reader. When I was age 12, 13, I was reading my parents' books that they were trying to hide from me, So I think we should give young readers more credit and So I just wrote it as I would have liked to have a writer approach me, if that makes any sense. Because I was reading Toni Morrison at age 13. All of it didn't make sense. It didn't all make sense, but that was what I was hungry for.
Yeah.
So I just wrote it. And as to Zainab, again, I think this is also a part of me that I haven't expressed much. I think if you're going to look at my body of work, you think I was this very serious person, but I have this very silly side too that likes to just do silly things. So I want to show that in my work too sometimes. So it was a lot of fun, and going back to New York and thinking about some of like the experiences I had in my 20s. Again, it's not autobiographical. I feel like I have to keep saying that with that book because it's going to come out and everybody's going to say, this is you. But there were elements that I stole from my own life, of course. Yeah.
And I love that you were able to allow yourself to push out of that box as well, because I think we can become constrained by this idea of, oh, I write serious, I have to remain serious. But the fact that you've allowed yourself to play and explore. Yeah.
But it's sad that it took like the threat of the world ending to get me to be like, okay, let's have some fun.
You did it.
I did it finally.
You did it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcel.
Any other questions? We don't really get many opportunities to have Ayesha in front of us in person. So if you have any questions, this is the time. And this will probably be my last Q&A round. So I won't be giving you another opportunity. I'll be hogging the mic. Okay, please approach the mic. Thank you.
So like you said, we won't get many opportunities. So I'm also in a book club in Toronto.
Okay.
And we normally pick our books based on a vote. And I'd love to recommend your book and hopefully stay in touch, and maybe it'd be lovely to get your vote after we read it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's coming out in North America March 1st as well, so it's perfect timing. So, and please recommend Nana's book as well, which also comes out in North America. So
I will.
I think the flyer has some of the information. So.
I've got it. I'll keep in touch.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Yes, you can also let us know of opportunities.
Yes. Any filmmakers again in the audience?
Hi.
Hello.
I realize you have very colorful book covers. I would like to know which artist you use.
So each of them is very different. The very first book, I chose the artist myself. The other books, it was the publishing houses that did that work of finding the artist. But I'll talk about the first one. So Ayikwe Ama's son, Inse Ama, he lived in Popengine at the time and was doing these beautiful Adinkra drawings, and he's just so talented. And I was a penniless writer at the time, but I said, I can pay you a little bit. So he did the drawings for Hamatan Rain. And then with my second book, I remember pushing back very strongly because my publishers at the time had put a tree on the cover. And it was around the time when there was this video about how to write about Africa going around by Binyavanga Winene. And it said, put a tree on the cover. So I said, no, we cannot do this, please. So they listened to me, and they got this beautiful photo by a Cameroonian photographer. I really love the cover. The 100 Wells of Salaga, I got lucky because with all the translations, it's been translated into French, Dutch, Portuguese, Italian, not Portuguese for that one, German, and another language I can't, and the US version. Each of the covers is just so beautiful, and I luck out each time, but there's the publishers again that do that work of finding the artists. And then they'll come with a few examples, and I get to approve and say whether or not I like it before it goes out to printing. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, covers are so important.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So important. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Yes.
It's Mr. Booknook. Nana.
Good to see you, Ayesha.
Hello, good to see you too.
You mentioned that your books are getting smaller. And I also observed that the target audience is also shifting towards younger children from the adults. So do we see you getting to the other extreme of writing for much, much younger children as well?
I would love that. Yes, I actually have a book in the works right now ages, let's say 4 to 6. I'm still working on it, but I think also being a mother, just you see what kinds of books are out there, and you want more of your children to be represented. So yes, it's a dream. But I did say I had a book that's spanning 5,000 years, so I think that's going to be a colossus.
So my my second question, you mentioned the book tour outside the continent, actually.
Yes.
What has been your challenge or your experience? Talking about your books, getting your books across to Africa, touring the continent. I think that that experience would also be good.
Yeah. So with the 100 Wells of Salaga, Cassava Republic were amazing in getting me into Nigeria. So we went for the Ake Book Festival. And then I did a few school tours. I went to some universities in Lagos and even outside of Lagos. And then in Accra, most of the time I would have to do that myself, meeting up with bookshop owners or whoever would have me. Usually my high school, they're so welcoming and they invite me back every year, so I've done that. But it's hard. I remember taking Hamatan Rain back in the day to the Labone bookstore, and I was told my book was too expensive for the bookstore. That was very heartbreaking. I think it's changed since then. But there are other challenges, like there's a bookstore in Senegal that is really wonderful. It's run by a woman called Angela Franklin, Shea Alpha Books. And she wants to stock books, but to ship from Nigeria to Senegal, the logistics are just so problematic that she has to get the books coming down from England. So there are things like just all sorts of difficulties. They know for a long time there was a problem between Ghana and Nigeria with the border. So my books couldn't come over from Nigeria. Nana, you probably know this. So these are some of the problems that I'm faced with. And just getting from one place to the continent, in the continent to another. If I had to go on book tour on this continent, I would probably have to go up to Europe, come down, go up there to the Middle East, come there. It's just a nightmare. It's a nightmare. So yeah, these are some of the challenges.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Kakra.
Good evening.
And I used to read a lot of newspapers when I was growing up. And one of my favorite news writers was Uncle Harruna Attah. Yes. So I surmise to say that you are a chip of the old block with a fiction. Because he wouldn't write a fiction story or whatever. He would write. And then the next day, Yes. So have you thought about, doing like a collaboration with both parents to fuse fiction with some of these topics that you have raised in your books? Have you thought about that? Thank you.
I would love that. I keep telling my father we have to sit down and just tell his stories from his childhood. So over to you, Mr. Attah.
This is a challenge.
It's a challenge.
In a few years' time, we'll be expecting Ayesha Harruna Attah and Alhaji Harruna Attah at Pager or NYU Labone Dialogues.
Yes.
Okay, please, a gentleman in white. And then afterwards, a gentleman in grey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kwame. Just
Kwame.
I'd like to take a step back. I'm wondering, with regards to you being an author, you mentioned some challenge you had with the publisher. Do you think there are any downsides to work with the publisher, having your work mediated by what the publisher wants? And do you think there's a future for authors going solo? Maybe not 100% solo, but do you think there are opportunities where you could set your own terms and even impacts the world to a greater extent than which most houses will not necessarily agree to? Thanks.
It's a good question, an interesting one too. I think for me as a writer, I want to focus on the creative part. I want to write. And so having a publisher solves all those headaches of what's the book design going to look like, who am I going to have edit the book. All these are important because you want your book to be well edited. And if you go solo, you have to find a good editor, you have to take care of all these things that a publishing house comes with. So that's one of the pluses for going with a publishing house. It is hard, however, to get access into these publishing houses unless you have an agent. And then that too, it's its own wahala. It took me years to find an agent, and then finally my agent came to me. So I know what that is like. Going solo, I think if you have a platform, there are people who are very active on social media or have followings. If you have a church following, or I don't know, you have a big alumni network, then that could be something interesting for you as a writer and creative. So you have to do the work yourself. But I know I just want to work on the creation and the creative side of this business, and I'll let the professionals do the rest because they do it well. So I'm happy to have that arrangement. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. There's a gentleman on the left. It's you, sir. Yeah.
Uncle. Uncle Kwame.
Yeah, Aisha, good evening.
Good evening.
Good to see you after a
Same
few
here.
years now. And good to see you. You have to go and drink some beer.
All the drinking partners are here. We love it.
No, with us it's worse than that. Yeah, Aisha, two questions. One, you are West African.
Yes.
You know Nigeria. You know Ghana. You live in Senegal now.
Yes.
All these three countries have rich literary, artistic cultures that I'm sure you have imbibed and all of that. What particular writers in our region have influenced you most? And you've been working with Ayikwe for quite a few years now. My second question is about politics. When you write, consciously or after you finish, is there some social, political, how do I call it, vision or objective that is in your writing? It doesn't have to be there, but I'm asking in case you have that, yes.
Okay, thank you for these two questions. So with the first one, yes, Ayikwe Ama has had probably the most influence on my work because I've sat down with him, I've worked with him, he's a mentor and a friend. So even just seeing how his mind works has been very, very inspiring. And he's one writer who works with vision. So I see what his vision is and how he has been able to infuse that in his writing. Auntie Ama Attah has been really wonderful. Just the way she writes, I always like to say it's as if I have like an old wise auntie sitting next to me and whispering in my ear. It's just so accessible, even though, again, she's also talking about difficult subjects. Buchi Emecheta, we mentioned her. And there are actually younger writers as well. I love BC's work. Nana's book is nonfiction, but it's remarkable, the amount of work that went into this book. It's called The Sex Lives of African Women. And then younger writer, there's a writer called Akweke Emezi. The book, Freshwater, was very, very interesting the way it was put together, and I love that book a lot. Let's see which other writers. From Senegal, Mariama Ba. Again, another person who just writes with ease. I think that's what it is with Auntie Ama and Mariama Ba. Even though you know from having done this work that to write that simply, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And then when it comes to politics, I think for me it is telling the African story. So this I knew from an early age. I went to a high school whose motto was knowledge in the service of Africa, so I swallowed it whole. And so even when I was studying medicine, I knew I wanted to come back to be a doctor here. So it is, telling that African story. But it's shifted. I think in the past, the lens was with an outside gaze to show Africa to the rest of the world. But now that has shifted and has become Africa for Africans. Like, let's figure out our histories ourselves. Let's dig deep, because nobody's going to do that work for us. So it is telling stories that we've not heard told, unearthing things that we've forgotten, and inventing new futures for ourselves, I think is what my message is, even as I'm writing light books like Zainab Takes New York.
This feels to me like the perfect night to bring, like the perfect response to bring the evening to an end. Thank you so much for all these wonderful questions. But do you have any final words for us? And can you also share how people can stay connected? And
I think the final word is just a reiteration of what I've mentioned before about magic. And I'm going to add a little thing to it, is about kindness and being kind to yourself and to other people, even as you're creating. And I think creatives can have it really, really hard, and that's why there is the stereotype of, the creative who tends to the bottle or to drugs. So being kind to oneself is a big part of the process. So if there's anyone in the audience who is a writer, an artist, or is trying to produce any such work, just be kind on yourself, and there are ways to approach your work that won't kill you. And then lean into the magic. It's out there. Just look for it. Yeah.
And where can people follow you in this day and age?
So I am on Instagram at Ayesha H. Attah. I am also on Facebook, Ayesha Harruna Attah. And I'm generally good with emails. People can email me, and I'm fine with that. So yeah.
Can we have a huge round of applause for Ayesha, please?
Thank you, Nana.
Thank you. You've been incredible. You shared so much, been so generous. Thank you to everybody watching us on the live stream as well. And yes, stay, mingle, chat. There'll be books for sale.
There are books for sale, yes.
Yes, there are books for sale. So go grab a book.
Yeah.
Ayesha will sign. First Match. Zainab Takes New York, one of my favorite books by Ayesha, which is saying a lot because I love 100 Walls of Salaga. I love Deep Blue with Between. Be out, so please buy it. You can buy it now on Kindle. Yes. So thank you so much, Ayesha. You've been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ayesha. Just like the line in Deep Blue Sea, to make the heart eat is to keep it hungry. You fed us with your information, and yet we are still hungry for more. But for time, we would have to end here. And I can't wait to get Zainab in New York, because Ayesha insists it's not a biography or an autobiography. At this point, I'd like to invite our science director, Professor Frankie Edozian, to give us a vote of thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's much, much appreciated. And what an amazing job. Thank you so much. From one writer to another writer, you really just raised the bar, so we're so grateful you could come here. And as for Ayesha, she's at home. I don't know if you guys know, she went to NYU. This is the kind of excellence that we are all so very proud of. New York University is a private university, but it has always been in the public service. So for us here at NYU Accra, it is all about what can we do to ensure that the values of New York University, education and literature, is not just for those of us in our bubble, but for all of us. So thank you, everybody, for coming. On behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Linda Mills, and the Office of Global Programming, I want to make a few thank yous before we go and have refreshments and buy some books. First and foremost, we are, as we know, it takes a village, and it has been a village of people in Accra since 2004 that has made NYU Accra the institution that it is. So we're very, very thankful, first and foremost, to our forever mayor, Uncle Nat Amatefio, who for all the years that we were in Accra, always was at Labone Dialogues. He understood our mission, he loved us, and in heaven we know that we keep trying to make him proud. So Uncle Nat, we miss you and we will think of you. Rest in peace. We're very, very thankful to our partners at the United Nations, especially Ambassador Charles Abani. And of course, right in the front row, we're very, very thankful for the European Union Ambassador Echad Rezali. They and their team are always very, very supportive of literature, supportive of books. We are so, so grateful that for the first time we could welcome the German ambassador, Daniel Kroll, to NYU Accra. The United States Embassy and all of its team members have always been so supportive of us, and we are really, really thankful to them, as well as the representative of the Nigerian Embassy.